time it is. Gotcha. Get into it, lovelies. Get into it. Hi. We're back, my darlings. We're back with another installment of Storytime with Chris. As I always say, you don't have to watch these videos when they go live. You're more than welcome to watch them in your downtime, nap time, max, relax, and chillaxing time. In between time, mean time, scheme time, study time, break time, CP time, any time that you want to hear a highly animated voice bring you wonderful stories of magic, fantasy, science fiction, adventure, and many, many more in between. Hi, lovelies. We're back. Now, I'm a little strapped on time because I got to get ready to go to work in a bit. So let's go ahead and get started because we've been beset upon by the dark a challenge to see if Bran is worthy to be of the circle to gain the silver on the tree, the mistletoe with which grows once every 700 years, which is actually pretty interesting. There's actually a couple of actual plants in the modern day that only blossom once every few decades or once every 5 years or something like that, and it's totally a thing. If memory serves me correctly, there's a library that has a giant like plant that stays budded most of the time, but then like once every few years it unfurls and it's this giant petals and beautiful plumage and whatnot, but it only blossoms every so often. I'm gonna look that up. But there we go. Chapter 19. The Rising. The Black Rider said, "We challenge the boy Bran of Clovid in the Disney Valley in the kingdom of Gwynedd, called Bran Davis, for his father in the world of his growing, called the Pendragon for his father the Pendragon in the world from which he came. We challenge his place in this business. He has not the right." "He has the right of birth," Will said sharply. "There lies the challenge, old one. You shall hear." The Black Rider could not now be seen. His voice came hollowly out of the dark turmoil beyond the mist. Will had the sudden sense of an endless army of unseen forms behind him. Out there in the dark, he looked quickly and quietly away. The lady's clear voice said, overheard, "Whom do you seek to judge the challenge, Lord of the Dark? For you have the right to choose, as the light has the right to approve or deny your choice." There was a deliberate pause. All at once the rider was visible again, a distinct figure, his hooded head turned toward Merriman. "We choose the man, John Rowlands," he said. Merriman glanced out at Will. He said nothing, either aloud or in the silent speech of the old ones, but Will could feel his indecision. He was filled with the same vague suspicion himself. What are they up to? But it fell back like a wave that breaks over a rock when he thought of John Rowlands and their long reasons for trusting his judgment. Merriman nodded. He lifted his wild-haired white head. "That is agreed." John Rowlands was paying them no attention. He stood in the middle of the boat with Jane, Barney, and Simon grouped beside him on a thwart as if they had drawn close for comfort. Though for whose comfort Will would not have cared to tell, Rowlands was gazing at Bran, his lean-lined brown face tight with anxiety. His dark eyes flickered to the tranquil, gleaming form of the lady, and then back to the bright mist of enclosing Bran. "Branbach," he said unhappily. "Are you all right?" But there was no answer, and instead the lady turned her grave face to Rowlands, and he was suddenly very still, looking up at her, a silent, awkward figure with a dark formal suit sitting on his lithe frame as if it belonged to someone else. "John Rowlands," the cool musical voice said, "there will be things said to you now by lords of the dark and of the light. And you must listen to each with good attention and weigh in your own mind the merit of what is said by each. And then you must say which you think is in the right, without fear or favor, and the power of the high magic, which is present in this place as it is everywhere in the universe, will put its seal on your decision." John Rowlands stood there, still looking at her. He seemed caught in awe, but there were spots of color on his high cheekbones, and the finely modeled mouth was set in a straight line. Very quietly, he said, "Must." Will flinched and carefully did not look at the lady. He heard Merriman's hiss softly between his teeth, but the lady's voice grew quieter, more gentle. No, my friend. This matter holds no compulsion. We ask a favor of you to make such a judgment, for in this world of men it is the fate of men which is at stake in the long run, and no one but a man should have the judging of it. Have you not said as much yourself to the old ones here and elsewhere? John Rowlands turned and looked at Will without expression. Then he said slowly, Very well. Suddenly, Will was conscious of a crowding of the old ones, an immense array of shadowy presences all around him and behind him, on the still misted river, hovering in the unseen vessels like their own that he had glimpsed, just as they had traveled across the miles and years of the island of Britain in the vehicle that had taken the appearance of a train. It was as if he heard the murmuring of a great crowd, as if he had heard the whole circle of the old ones gathered twice before in the course of his life, yet there was no sound. He knew but the whispering of the wind in the trees that edged the river, holding in his mind the sense of their attendance and his awareness of Merriman's tall blue robe form at his side. He looked hard and openly at the whirling black mist of the dark, as he had not dared look before. The voice of the rider came strong and confident out of it. Judge, then, you know that the boy, Bran, was born in a time long past, and brought into the future to grow there. His mother brought him because she had once in her own time greatly deceived her lord and husband, Arthur, and although the boy was his true son, she feared that he would not believe that it was so. John Rowland said emptily, Men may be deceived indeed, but men forgive. The rider said swiftly, smoothly, and the boy's father would have forgiven and believed Guinevere if he had had the chance, but a lord of the light took Guinevere through time at her asking, and so there was no chance, and the boy was taken away. Merriman softly said, deeply, at her asking. But, the rider said, and mark this, John Rowlands, but not to a time of her asking. Will felt a coldness creeping into his mind, a dreadful misgiving like a tiny crack that grows in a great secure dam holding back the sea. Merriman's robe rustled beside him. The rider's voice was quiet and confident. She came to the mountains of Gwynedd with her child without thought of the time to which she came, and a man of the 20th century called Owen Davis fell in love with her and took her and reared her child as his own when she vanished away again. But what century was not of her choosing? She went where the Lord of the Light took her. She did not care, but the Light had great care. Suddenly his voice rose and became harsh and accusing. The Light chose and made sure that Bran ap Arthur, Bran Pendragon came to this time to grow into the right place at the right moment for the working of the quest of the light. Thus, all the old prophecies have been fulfilled only by the manipulation of time, and that is a twisting of the terms of the high magic. So we claim that the boy Bran, who is only here through the craft of the light, should go back to the time in which he belongs. John Rowland said thoughtfully, Send him back more than 1,000 years. And what language were men speaking here then? Latin, Will said. Excuse me. He has very little Latin, John Rowland said, looking out at the dark mist beyond the river. You are frivolous, the voice out of the darkness said curtly. He may be taken out of time merely as he is now, so long as he plays no part in this present matter. Not frivolous, John Rowland said softly still. I'm simply wondering how a boy can be said to belong in a time to whose language he does not even speak. Just wondering, sir, in order to judge. Merriman said without moving from the place at the stern of the boat, Belonging, that is the answer to the challenge. Whether it was the boy's mother or the light who chose the time into which he came in to grow up, or whether the choice was random. Nevertheless, he has attached himself to that time. He has bound himself by love to those with whom he has lived there. Most particularly Owen Davis, his adopted father and Davis's friend, John Rowlands. Yes, John Rowland said, looking up in the same swift anxiety as before to the strange case of misty light in which dimly they could see Bran held motionless. Such lovely bonds, Merriman said, are outside the control even of the high magic, for they are the strongest thing on all this earth. But then, out of the darkness beside them, over the still water from no direction that they could tell, a frightened voice called urgently, "John! John!" John Rowland's head jerked upright, wary and yet longing. "That's Mrs. Rowlands," Jane whispered. "Where is she?" Barney swung all around, for the voice had seemed to come out of the air. "There!" Simon was pointing. His voice trailed away. "There." They could see only her face, dimly lighted in the churning darkness beside the boat, and her hands outstretched. She was gazing imploringly at John Rowlands, and her voice was the soft, warm voice they had known in the beginning, and it was full of fear. "John, help me, help! I have no hand in all these things. I am possessed. This is a mind of the dark that comes into my own, and then I say things, and I do things I do not know what they are. John, we too have loving bonds of our own. Schonibach, you must help. They say they will let me go free if you will help them." "Help them?" John Rowland seemed to speak with difficulty. His voice sounded slow and rusty. "Set right the balance," the Black Rider said curtly. "Give us the proper decision that the light is not entitled to the help of the boy Bran, and we will leave the mind of your wife Bloodwind Rowlands and give her back to you." "Oh, please, John." Mrs. Rowlands reached out her arms to him, and the appeal in her voice was so poignant that Jane, listening, could hardly bear to keep still. The things she had learned about Bloodwind Rowlands vanished totally from her mind. She could hear only the unhappiness and yearning of one human being cut off from another. Possession. That was the same odd creaking quality in John Rowlands' voice, as if he were forcing the words out. "It is like the possession by demons, you mean, that they used to speak of in the old days?" The Black Rider gave a low, bubbling laugh, a cold sound. Bloodwind Rowland said eagerly, "Yes, yes, it is the same. It is the dark taking over my mind and making me into something else while it is there. Oh, John Cradat, say what they want so that we can go home to the cottage and be as happy again as we've been all these years. This is all a terrible dream. I want to go home." John Rowland's fists clenched tight as the plaintive musical voice rose in appeal. He gazed at his wife's face, longing and closely. Turning uncertain, he looked up at Merriman and Will, and last of all at the high remote form of the lady. But each one of them looked back at him expressionless, without any sign of threat or appeal or advice. John Rowlands looked back at Bloodwind, and suddenly Jane felt a hollow feeling of shock at the pit of her stomach, for the look that she saw on his face now was like a sad farewell for something that is forever gone. His voice was low and gentle, and they could barely hear it over the soft whimpering of the breeze on the riverbank. "I do not believe any power can possess the mind of a man or woman, Blood, or wherever your name should really be. I believe in God-given free will, you see. I think nothing is forced on us except by other people like ourselves. I think our decisions are our own, and you are not possessed therefore. You must be allied to the dark because you have chosen to be. Terrible, though, that is for me to believe after all these long years. Either that, or you are not human, wholly a creature of the dark. A different creature whom I've never really known." The soft, deep voice hung over the misty river, and for a moment there was no sound or movement anywhere from the indistinct flotilla of the light or the teeming blackness of the dark. Bloodwind Rowland's glimmering face was still there, and the towering figure of the rider. John Rowland's deep whisper went on, as if he were speaking his thoughts to himself. "And as to Bran, that is a matter of a boy whose choice at first was not his own, but who has lived his own life since then, which is all that you can say of most of us in the end. He has indeed made loving bonds for himself with his father, adoptive father if you like, and with me and with the others who have watched him grow up on Clivet Farm, though not with my wife as I had thought." His voice hushed to nothing, and he shallowed and was silent for a moment. Jane was watching Bloodwind Rowland's face. She saw it begin gradually to harden. The longing dropped away like a mask, leaving indifference and a cold rage. "If I am to judge," John Rowland said, "then I judge that Bran Davis belongs to the time in which both he and I live our lives, and that since he is not separate as I am, but has thrown his lot with the light and risked much for them, then there is no reason why he should not be free to help their cause. As Others are free to help the dark if they choose. He looked up at the lady. There's my judgment, then. His voice seemed deliberately rough and raw, as if he was trying to isolate himself. The lady said clearly, The high magic confirms it and thanks you, John Rowlands, and the light accepts that this is the law. She turned a little towards the bank of the river, to the churning darkness behind the mist. The brightness seemed to grow around her, and her voice rose. And the dark rider? The wind was rising, tugging at her long blue robe. Somewhere, far off, faint thunder rolled. The Black Rider said in a quiet fury, It is the law. He came a little way out of his dark refuge and put back his hood, and his blue eyes glinted in the scarred face. You are a fool, John Rowlands. You choose to destroy your home for the sake of a nameless cause. For the sake of a boy's life, John Rowlands said. He was always a fool, always. Bloodwood Rowland's voice came out of the darkness, strident, stronger than before. It was again the voice of the White Rider, and suddenly listening, Will knew that he had always heard the likeness of the two, but never thought to add them together, and he saw from Jane's face that she had in her mind the same fearful parallel. The thunder rumbled again closer. A soft one, Bloodwood Rowlands cried. A shepherd and a harp player. Fool! Fool! And her voice rose high into the whine of the rising wind and was carried away into the darkening sky. All around them the mist was darkening now, and the sky above was solid with clouds so dark, a gray as to be nearly black. But the lady raised her arm and pointed the 5 fingers of her hand at Bran, where he stood motionless in his cage of bright mist. There was a hint of music in Will's ears, though he did not know if anyone else heard, and then Bran was standing there clear with the sword Erias in his hand, and the blade of the sword was flaming with cold blue light. Bran raised Erias in the air like a brand, swelling behind him and all around him. Will felt the company of the light advancing, driving on, and he saw that their boat was moving again, the water lapping past the bow, choppier now with smaller waves raised by the rising wind. He knew that the other vessels of their shadowy fleet were moving too, but at the same time the sky was growing darker, darker yet, filled with great billowing clouds. The wind gusted suddenly higher. He saw the lady's robe swirl around her slender form and Merriman's dark cloak billow out like a spinnaker over the bow, and then for an instant all light was blotted out around them, as with a roaring the whirling tornado of the dark rose into the sky, traveling over and before them, circling the horizon to collect its final strength. Only one streak of light still glowed. Standing in the bow of their boat, Bran swept the crystal sword before him in a blue line cutting the air, and the dark mist parted in a ragged widening gap. They saw green fields rising before them, and suddenly they were all standing on a smooth green slope, on grass, with the river no more than a distant murmur in their ears. Stay close, all 6, Merriman said. He led them up the grass slope. The chain of signs rang musically round Will's neck. He could feel the myriad shadowy forms of the circle all around them, shielding them, pressing them on. John Rowlands moved beside the lady, blank-faced as if in a trance. Thunder growled overhead. Then the last of the mist blew away, and in the dim light beneath the lowering they saw a line of trees before them, a wood of beech trees caping a round chalk hill, and gradually appearing on the slope in front of the wood, a single huge tree. It took shape under their eyes, a shadowy outline becoming steadily more solid and real. It rose and filled out, and its broad leaves rustled and tousled in the wind. Its trunk was as thick as 10 men. Branches spread wide as a house. It was an oak tree more vast and ancient than any tree that they had ever seen. Overhead, lightning ripped out one of the dark clouds, and the thunder came thumping at them like a huge fist. Barney said, whispering, Silver on the tree? Bran pointed Erias up into the tree in a sweeping, triumphant gesture. See where the first branch divides? There! And through the swaying branches, they could see the mistletoe, the strange invading clump of a different green than the green of the oak, the twinning stems and the small leaves growing upon the tree, glimmering a little with the light of their own. Will gazed at the plant and seemed to see it changing, flickering. He blinked in vain to make out something in the middle of the clump. Merriman's dark cloak blew around him in the rising wind. There will be one spray of blossoms only, he said in his deep voice, rough with train, and we shall see each bud break, and when every small bright flower on that spray is in bloom, only then do we cut the spray. Then, and not before and not afterwards, but only in that one moment does the great spell have force. And in that moment too, he who cuts the mistletoe must be kept from attack by the 6, each with one of the signs. He turned his deep-shadowed eyes on Will, and Will reached to his to take off the gold-linked circle of the sides. But before he could touch them, white lightning suddenly flashed far closer than before from the dark cloud based overhead. Will saw Merriman's tall form stiffen facing the great tree. He too turned, seeking the mistletoe, and saw all at once that a glint of light, fierce as fire, came from the middle of the strange green clump. The moment was coming. The first bud on the spray of the mistletoe flowers had broken into bloom, and with it, the dark came rising. Will had never by any enchantment known what it would be like. Long afterwards, he thought it might have been like what happens to a mind that goes instantly and totally mad. And once, for here, the world went mad, like a soundless explosion. The immense force of the dark's power rocked everything around him, rocked his senses. He staggered, reaching blindly for support that was not there. The appearances of things ran wild. Black seemed white, green seemed red, all flickering and throbbing as if the sun had swallowed the earth. A great scarlet tree loomed over him against a sky of livid white. The others of the 6 flashing in and out of sight were like negative images, blurred forms with black teeth and empty white eyes. The endless dull roar of thunder filled his ears and his mind. He felt sick and ill, cold and hot at once, his eyes closing to slits, a constriction growing in his throat. Unable to move any limb, he saw through leaden eyelids that Simon and Jane and Barney had collapsed to the ground, moving with tremendous effort as if held down by weights. They struggled in vain to get up. Darkness loomed over them, slowly turning his heavy head. Will saw in sick horror that half the sky, half the world behind him, was filled with the whirling black tornado of the dark. Spinning between cloud and earth, more vast than his senses could comprehend, he saw Bran staggering, holding up a blue streak of flame as if for support. Bright blue, he thought. I've never seen a brighter blue except the lady's eyes. The lady. Where is the lady? And he could not move to look for her, but crumpled to his knees while the world wove to and fro in his spinning gaze. It was only by simple accident that his feeble hand hit the circle of signs hanging from his neck. Then all at once he could see clearly, and wonder caught him as he saw. Down across the storming sky, cleaving the monstrous gray-black clouds, came 6 horsemen riding. 3 on either side they came, silent, silvery gray glinting figures on horses of the same strange half-color, galloping, cloaks flying, with drawn swords in their hands. One of them wore a glinting circlet about his head, but Will could not clearly see his face. "The sleepers, right?" Bran called him. Will saw him leaning back in an intent curve, staring upward, clear against the green grass with his white hair and blue flaming outflung sword. "The 7 sleepers changed now to riders, just as I said they would be." "But still, I remember there were 6 sleepers," Will said softly to Merriman, so softly that he knew Bran could not hear. 6 sleepers, oldest of the old, that which once we woke out of their long sleep beside the lake with the golden harp. Merriman never moved nor spoke, but stood looking at the terrible sky, and as Will gazed up at the wheeling riders of the light, a long brightness began to glow in the east, like a white sun rising. Another figure came leaping across the sky, a different rider of a different shape, like no shape ever born on the earth. He was a tall man riding a brilliant white gold horse, but his head was horned like the head of a stag, with shining antlers curving out in 7 times. As Will gazed, he raised his great head, yellow light flashing from tawny round eyes like the eyes of an owl, and he gave a call that was like the hello a huntsman blows on the horn to call up hounds, and through the sky after him, belling and baying, came flowing an endless pack of huge, ghostly white hounds, red-eared, red-eyed, fearsome creatures running inexorably on a trail no living power could turn. They milled round the feet of the huntsman's horse. High up there in the skies, he laughed dreadfully over them in delight of the chase. They thronged round the silver-gray horses of the sleepers, waiting restlessly to join the hunt. So that is a character that Will was able to discover at the end of the 2nd book of the series, The Dark is Rising. The huntsman and his bloodhounds coming to drive away the dark. And before, his brother had sent him a tribal mask of a stag slash man from Africa, from one of the old ones from Africa that his brother Steven, who was on military leave, was at. And so that mask was the basis for the hunter coming into the living world. So yeah, we've got the sleepers from the Grey King. We've got the hunter from the second book. We've got all 6 of the signs from the second book as well. We've got the Grail from the first book. We've got the secret of the Green Witch from the third book. Yeah, everything is coming full circle. And then the huntsman in a wild shout gave the call to let loose the chase, and he and the ghost grey swordsman, 7 riders, were leaping through the clouds, with the hounds of doom flooding after them, red eyes burning, 1,000 throats giving tongue like the whickering of a migrant geese. The wild hut in full cry against the dark for the last time. The vast storm cone of the dark lashed and thrashed about the sky as if in agony, and its tip seemed to split away. A horrible flailing filled the sky until, with one last convulsive lunge that seemed to bring half the clouds in the heavens down to the earth, the huge tornado-like black pillar rushed away and upward, out into nowhere, with the sleepers in the wild hunt in howling, merciless pursuit. But great Herne, the hunter, reined in his white gold mare, leaping high in the heavens with the force of an arrested speed, and he turned, seeking through the torn and rushing clouds with his tawny wild eyes, and in sudden new terror Will saw what he sought, the peak of dark power that would never flee, the 2 huge figures, indestructible now in their full power, of the Black Rider and the White Rider of the Dark, curving out of the sky on a long, rushing lunge down to the grassy Chiltern Hill and the enchanted tree. So Mr. Hastings from the first book and the Rider from the second book. Will heard Simon shout from beside the tree, the first sound any one of the 6 had made in all their breathless watching, and he turned back to see flashing on the tree new small brilliant points of light as more buds on the green patch of mistletoe burst into the magical bloom. His hands went to his neck in the same instant that he heard Merriman's silent cry of command in his mind, and he tore off the circle of sides. High in the sky the riders grew now to huge size, came rushing closer towards the earth. Will shouted to Simon and Barney and Jane, 6 sides shall burn! Take 1 for each and circle the tree! They were at his side, eager, reaching, and in the gold-linked chain, each sign in turn came easily away from the rest, as the gold seemed to melt and vanish like wax. Simon took the smooth black sign of iron, and rushed with it to the tree, to stand against the gnarled, enormous trunk, holding it high in challenge. Jane followed with the gleaming sign of bronze, Barney with the rowan-born sign of wood. There they stood, brave and quivering, staring terrified at the monstrous riders galloping headlong down from the huge clouds, down to consume them swiftly. Merriman joined them with the brilliant gold sign of fire, Bran holding the crystal sign of water with the sword, to leave Will swinging round at last of all was his back to the tree, holding up in defiance the glittering black flint sign of stone, and the riders were upon them with bright lightning and deep thunder that came from no cloud but out of the dark air. Their huge horses reared up, screaming, lashing out with wild, deadly hooves. Herne's great horned figure rode at the Dark Lords and attacked from above, and the force of all the unseen shades of the circle was from above, and holding, barring, wrestling them below, with the lady as its shining focus. But the strain was near to breaking point, and in a burst of brilliance the last flower on the mistletoe burst into bloom. Bran reached up, his white hair flying, swinging Erias over his head to cut the spray, but with the sign of water in his left hand, he had only one arm for the long crystal blade, and his balance would not hold. He cried out in desperation. The Black Rider's eyes blazed blue as sapphires, and he lunged forward in triumph, straining to break through the strength of the circle and reach the shining bloom with his own sword. But suddenly John Rowlands was at Bran's side, pale and grim. He seized the sign of water and thrust it out against the rearing attack, the shimmering crystal circle frail in his big brown hand, and Bran, free now to use both arms, swung the glittering blade of the sword Erias at the green mistletoe within the oak, and cut the stars of bright blossom from the tree. As the spray parted, Merriman turned, tall and triumphant, and caught the blossom before it fell. He swept round, blue cloak billowing, and in a swift, breathtaking movement flung it up into the sky, and the mistletoe blossom changed in that instant to a white bird, and the bird flew up into the sky, and away through the broken white clouds, scudded now across the blue, away into the world. Each of the signs held there in each of their hands blazed suddenly with a coal like fire, too bright for eyes to watch, and with two mingling voices crying out in fear and despair, the great rearing figures of the Black Rider and the White Rider of the Dark fell backwards out of time and disappeared, and each of the 6 hands suddenly was empty, as each sign burned with its cold fire into nothingness and was gone. And that's where we will end for this afternoon. Thank you all for joining me, lovelies. I will see you all next time. Be good. Bye-bye.